So here we are. We have David Horrocks. David's an interesting background and how he's got to where he is. He's currently at the
University College of Football Business in Manchester and a PhD student at University of Central Lancashire.
See, that is relatively new university, a private university.
It is,
which, as we were speaking earlier, throws up a whole series of new challenges, which we may well get into at some point in this discussion. But what we're really going to be interested in is David's research, and his practice, which has been in golf and professional soccer, and some of his articles, which have tried to get to the heart of some of the issues within professional soccer, which is a very interesting article with Gary Neville. So, David, tell us something about your research.
It originally came about, I actually played football myself, badly, until 20 years of age. Drifted for 10 years. I worked in IT consultancy and played non-league, semi-professional football, amateur football, Sunday league football for a period of 12, 14 years. As that was coming to an end, I started to coach, and I got interested in the psychology of coaching. I started to do a part-time course with the Open University, Introduction to Social Sciences, and one day whilst working as a coach at Burnley Football Club, I visited UCLan with the team to do some testing, got talking to the psychologist, and he managed to convince me to start to transfer to UCLan and do the psychology degree there.
Fabulous Dave Shaw.
Dave Shaw, yes, bless his cotton socks. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. Anyway, as I get into the degree, I started reading a lot of academic papers, so the lecturers, tutors have obviously done the job because further reading happened. And I was picking up a lot of papers on elite sport. This could be football, it could be tennis, it could be golf. And you start to look at the participants, you start to look at the results, you start to look at the whys and whens and what the papers are recommending. And I didn't agree with quite a lot of them. It has to be said, and it didn't always stack up with what I'd actually seen in the world of football. This led me, I'd actually grown up with people, some who'd made it and gone on to have very successful careers in the Premier League, and I knew that they were different to me. But when you were young, you don't know what those differences are, and you can't quantify them, list them, advise other people as to what they may be. Now, some of the traits that are coming out in the papers that I'm reading, I'm thinking, well, that's quite standard. I've got that. That's quite standard. I've got that, and I'm not elite. There's actually a difference here, and I know that certain people that I work with are different in what they do, and I think this actually needs investigating, bringing to light, and putting out there, because in my opinion, what I'm finding so far in academia is potentially half a job, not the full picture. I understand why the reasons may be, because access is difficult, but that's where I started.
I mean, just the some of the issues that come out in the research, in that is it the sort of claims in the researchers where they're looking at elite players? Is that the sort of bit that sort of threw the question out? Is that, in other words, you read it and say that participants were elite, but they might be looking at for example, elite male British tennis players. Well, in world terms, there's probably we'd struggle to get into more than, well, certainly to get two.
Absolutely, they're very few, and I found it a throwaway term. I could find more academic papers on elite sports people than I could find autobiographies of elite sports people, which I found rather odd. So the sort of research field's understanding of what is an elite person, who defines them and where they come from, how you become an expert, I think warranted more scrutiny. And the first piece of work that it took me to was Ericsson's now classically famous 1993 paper on expertise and deliberate practice, which was done with, it was ballet dancers and I forget what it was now, it's a while since I've read it, but you look at that and the crux of the paper, he netted down through tracing the life histories that these people had practiced on average for around about 10,000 hours. And I thought, I've probably played 10,000 hours worth of football and I've not got a Premier League career. That lets you dig in further, and I was fascinated by Ericsson. I actually emailed him, contacted him, actually reviewed, and he's the name reviewer on one of my papers, which led me to deliberate practice. So you've then got the difference between the two practices. And as an early academic, these papers are heavy going, they're difficult to understand. You're getting exposed to statistics for the first time. So you start to read things such as The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, more recently Bounce by Matthew Saeed, that are all around this generic message of 10,000 hours. And some governing bodies also actually preach or put this 10,000 out there. I'm accepting the number, but I'm not sort of accepting what the practices are, and I think it needs more definition. And as I got further involved with Ericsson, his papers called for every single domain warrants its own exploration in terms of what those 10,000 hours are and what they look like. They will be different in a fighter pilot, to a chess player, to a footballer, to a cyclist. So there's no reason why this particular field of research might not have thousands of papers to...
I mean, the 10,000 hours to me always was basically translated they need to do a lot of training.
Yes.
The 10,000 hours is an arbitrary figure because of if you really investigated the accuracy of the hours, you're then into memory issues of how long
they're all retrospective, so potentially sketchy.
And then some of the other popular books, like Bounce, often is not based on a scientific hypothesis analysis, but a response to comments in the press or the lay public about surely talent is innate, and responding to that in a way that says, well, actually, the number of hours you've got is going to have a massive bearing on that. And the only flip to that is then some of the parents who have taken this on, who've read those popular books, who then drive their children in order to get the hours in.
Absolutely. And in practice, and I've worked in football academies, and even some of the actual professional clubs, they'll quantify it down and they'll think, right, these kids have to train for 14 hours a week. Is that necessary? So my work went into football. The first paper was qualitative perspectives on elite performance and serial winning at Manchester United. And what I wanted to dig into was what made a football club survive for 25 years under the manager Alex Ferguson and repeatedly win with 4 or 5 different teams over that period of time. What is the creature that exists in that environment? What do they do? How do they live? What they do on a daily, weekly basis? How do they think? How do they sleep? How do they get to work? How do they rest? Because it is a way of life. And the crux of it was to try and actually understand those components and present them. What you do with them, yes, you can make recommendations. It might build talent development models. The classics out there are Jean Cote and the 4-stage model, which I did reference and cite in the paper. And football specific, I just changed it to 5 because I felt from what I was getting, certainly from United, there were 5 stages. And it accepts Coates' theory, it just develops it football specific, because they seem to have a hole between the sort of 16 and 21 bracket, which is post-education and going into the first team. And I've termed that the graduation phase. And I think there's less components in there, but what you get from the players and the coaches interviewed is that those components are certainly more intense, they're under high scrutiny, they have to be measured, there are pressures and there are consequences. And if you can learn how to manage, deal and develop within that environment, that seems to be the tipping point, going from an educational stage player to a first team player in professional football.
The England's disappointing results in the Euros came back with the suggestion that England players don't really cope with pressure. And you suggested a few things that are going on within that environment as the extent to which players are gradually or are exposed to that. But what would be the approach you take to try and develop a knowledge of how to cope with pressure by players? Because it seems that the elite ones can cope, and the non-elite ones inevitably are going to struggle.
They can. It's a strange conundrum. I mean, we've got the captain, for instance, Wayne Rooney, who's played in the Champions League final and won.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to say that he can't cope with pressure. He's won Premier League titles and performed in some very big games in front of very big crowds successfully and almost been unplayable, to coin a phrase from opposing managers. I don't think there is a solution out there at this point in time. I think you've got to look at the context of England games. We were speaking earlier about the players that are in the England teams. They tend to play for your big clubs, your Manchester Uniteds, the Real Madrids, Chelsea, Arsenal, and the majority of their games are big. They're either playing each other, or they play in Madrid, they play in Milan, they play in Ajax, they play in Galatasaray in Turkey, in front of hostile crowds. The result is a demand, because it's a one-leg or a two-leg game. And then the majority of the England games, when you actually net down the facts, if we were to sort of analyse the last 20-25 games, you've got Northern Ireland in there, you've got Slovenia, you've got Macedonia, you've got Andorra. How many of them are big? And when they get to the big one, an Argentina in a major tournament, unfortunately it happens to be in Iceland this time, we don't perform. And again, going back to the literature, I think deliberate practice, deliberate preparation, everything's got to be context relative, and maybe in an England shirt we don't have enough of that particular environment, context or culture to then expect it to happen in a one-off game every 12-18 months.
I mean, tonight we've got Man City, Barcelona. We've got several England players in the Man City team. Raheem Sterling, who's excelled this season, and that is going to be an absolute pressure cooker. And so it's almost that the media that then presented us with this, they don't cope with pressure. There's quite a lot of debate across social media. Interesting. They say they will talk about the UK are not that good at coping with pressure. Then 7 weeks later, the Olympics are just storming down medals. Oh, we seem to have coped now. So it's 7 weeks. But it's almost that there's an easy excuse for that. It's sort of, the comeback we don't get then is within a soccer environment. Is how would the psych try and create a pressure situation within a training session of any meaningful? Because we then get back to one of the other parts of that, with every psych that's gone anywhere near the England team will get penalties, and then the comeback from someone in the game will be you can't simulate the pressure, but you can simulate pressure in training, because every other sport does it. I mean, tennis players don't suddenly get to second serve down. It's a second serve down match point. What will I do now? That's such a routine to go through. Phillips Aidu in the Olympics doesn't go, triple jump today, I'll just chuck my jumper down there. That looks about right for my run up. I mean, that pressure is running, sprinting, landing as precise bit of where all the other sports do it. I am absolutely sure soccer don't ignore it, but I just think it doesn't get portrayed in the public.
I think as a sport it could do better from the exposure to other sports. We have all the tools to measure everything that goes on, every human movement, all the data of how many times the ball's been passed, left, right, forward, backwards. We know the speed that other teams may play out with the ball, without the ball. You will know whether they are successful or not at certain set pieces, what those set pieces look like. And I think you have to make your training context relative. I've been into certain clubs, and they'll say we have our opposition analysis here. This is what we'll work from in terms of training this week. And quite often you ask, what have you got? They might say, we've got the last 3 games, we've got the last 5 games. And I'll ask the question, so who are you playing? To take an example, we're playing Swansea. We're at Swansea. Right. Surely we should look at Swansea's last 10 home games. If that doesn't tell us anything, look at 20. Ultimately, this is human interaction and human behaviour. I don't think you can make a call on it until there's actually a pattern, and then you're confident that the evidence that you're dealing with is actually going to be meaningful. At that point, I think you can train context specific to actually go and win a football match. And ironically, 2 seconds ago, I was just looking at a text that I got from Alex Ferguson's book from a friend of mine, and he says in that text that we prepare to win games. I'm not all that fussed about the opposition. You have to understand them, but ultimately, if you load too much of the opponent into your players, that's going to put doubt in their minds. So if you train to win every game, I think you will win more than you will lose.
Yeah, which is you going in knowing what you're going to do.
What's the process? What does winning look like? Is it pressing faster against a specific team? If so, it's not just pressing fast. Look at the data, look at the computers. What does that look like? Is that 8 men or is it 11? And is it 27 miles an hour? Because if you're doing that on the training ground and you're only running at 24, you could argue one might as well not bother. So I think you need to take the cameras onto the training ground, take the GPS, measure it. Brailsford, a famous advocate, what does it take to win the Tour de France? What will you be faced with? What wattage, etc. on a bike to get up that hill? I think it's easily transferable.
And that is, the analogy would then be practicing on the relay baton, jogging around and passing it over, as opposed to doing a full pelt. And interesting, because I gave comment on this to over the media about GB. They're notoriously bad at dropping it. But what you saw in one of the finals was to think the American girls had a go on their own. And boy, they could do it easily. Because what you have got on your own is not 5 other competitors to distract your sight of your person coming at you. So all of a sudden, you're as the person receiving it, and it's absolutely clear where that baton's coming at, where the person's coming from. Wouldn't it be marvellous if in a soccer game that at a corner you knew what the opposition were going to do or not going to be there? It's almost like practicing with no one there is massively different.
Absolutely. And I think you can go to the nth degree. There's so much you can do with this. I mean, if you're playing against Everton, you know that Everton are going to play in blue. You look at pattern recognition and depth perception, you're going to see blue bodies coming towards you on the day. So why on your training ground would you not replicate that and get blue bibs? If you know that the 2 central defenders that are going to pick up the 2 forwards, one is 6'2" and one is 6'5", replicate that. So you get used to having to time the run correct to be above that 6'5" person to head that ball into the net. And it's all, for me, that is just context relative emphasis of Ericsson's deliberate practice theory.
Yes. I worked with a professional player. He was not the main choice. He was a second choice, and we always talked to him about preparation for games, and many times he wouldn't be preparing for training. So he'd be training, but not really training with a specific of who he's going to get. And he played at Old Trafford, interestingly enough, and he didn't know till really late he was going to play. And so the missed opportunity to try and get. Okay, you're going to be facing. That was at the time when Ryan Giggs was playing. You could have got a strategy, at least in your own mind, through watching tapes, getting imagery, then going out onto training, simulating in your own mind how that's going to be like, how you're going to cope. Needless to say, it was a daunting experience for him. Which is certainly within the social media, or how we got in touch was some of the parts about how the role of the psychologist within the England setup, as to whether it's performance management of which the psychologist could have a role in performance management,
Mm-hmm.
or in the psychologist could act as around the psychological states, the well-being of the person.
Absolutely, and I've actually had this discussion with a few clubs and with governing bodies. The sort of conclusion that we get to is potentially you might need 2 or 3. The performance psychologist, are you working with the players or are you working with the coach and the manager, or is there some integration, overlap, and where does it start and stop? The problem within the environment, if that's your role, the players see you as one of the people that is responsible for picking that team.
If you're the performance coach.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you have any social issues, I mean, they've been out in the media, certain players suffering from depression, they're not going to disclose that to you because you're seen as one of the people that's going to pick that team. And I've been on one particular training ground where we actually had a chaplain. And certain players that I was totally unaware of that might be having social or life difficulty would disclose to the chaplain. The chaplain might disclose this to me, but it might be 4 to 5 weeks after he's actually been told himself, which can be frustrating because you wonder, are you not trusted with the information? And maybe I've been doing things that I could have done better.
I'm not sure the chaplain should have told you at all, actually.
Well,
and if you were the psychologist as the counselling role, you'd have to that part of what you're going to say and where that's going to go would have to be established. That if I would possibly say I'm not going to tell him anything unless you agree to that going.
But in that particular scenario, it did take 4 or 5 weeks, and the player was confiding in the chaplain, and the chaplain eventually got trust, counselled, heard X number of stories, and I think what he managed to get across was, we're actually not going to be able to fix this unless we do talk to the people that are responsible for your job role, which is playing football. And again, there was a stutter of days, maybe a week or so, and ultimately between them, they saw sense. I think I felt a little embarrassed that a player or a person wouldn't want to trust me to tell me, so that makes you question your own role, whether you've done it correctly, whether you've done it rightly, or the fact that there actually should be a divide. And if there is one, ultimately, how do we get back to the job of being able to train, perform, get out on that pitch on a Saturday afternoon or a Tuesday night to operate at your optimal levels? Because that is not going to happen if there are other draining issues going on in the physiology of the person.
The several interesting parts about that. One is, as a performance psychologist, where you're looking to get them to perform better, you do tend to bump into the coaches a bit. And that,
very much.
And who often, within, depending on the culture of the sport, the mindset of the player is sometimes seen as their remit anyway.
Yes.
So in doing so, if you work directly with the players, it can be quite problematic in terms of your in and out position. So you come in and then you're out again. You're not there all the whole time. Can create a bit of a problem within that sense. But at the same time, the potential to set up practices where you really target psychological variables has such potential, doesn't it?
Oh, there are vast benefits. I mean, as well as the studies that I've done, when I've been out there in the field and you impart this in football and in golf, and there are further things that will be published from the PhD, because initially what I wanted to do was ascertain what elite performance was.
Yeah.
Then there's a bridge, which is best practice transfer. This is just literature explaining that best practice transfer happens from either business to sport or grocery to mining or whatever it may be. So the back end of the PhD, the final 2 chapters, are designing an intervention from football to put into golf, where I'm replicating the serial winning behaviours of United, or the individual preparation and thinking of Gary Neville, and over a multiple baseline with 4 players, there was 3 males and 1 female, young, fledgling touring professionals, and none of them had ever won. Within that period, the shortest one was 6 months, longest 26 months. We had 2 victories, but the key thing in the data, there was a vast improvement in finishing position.
Right.
They were getting a lot more top 10 finishes, and qualitatively, at the back end of the intervention, you then get the players and significant others, such as coaches, understanding of what's happened and whether there are any benefits. And they would report, I go on the first tee actually feeling like I'm here to win. I've prepared to win. I know what I'm doing. I have a process. The practice, the hours are in the bank. They're specific. So I'm no longer faced with things that might bring fear, anxiety, worry, skewed decision making. You accept it, you get on with the job. You can't win every tournament because you're 1 in 150. But what happens over the pattern, they're getting cut less. Cut in golf is where you finish sort of less than halfway through the field, so you're basically out of the tournament. And their average finishing position is higher, more top tens, and wins. So it's a small sample, but to date it's worked, and that poses a theory for practice in golf, in football, and in other sports, or in life in general, really going forward. It's solution focused.
Yeah. The what you made point you made earlier about making use of more objective data to try and set the practices out is quite useful in that, isn't it? And the idea that if the session, if the requirements go that you have to run at 25k an hour, or if as you take the penalty that you'll be doing that with 100 decibels going on around you.
Yes.
If you take a penalty at the end of 120 minutes and your legs are trembling, well, that then go. How do we? I mean, the strange part to me with the soccer, with the penalties, is that with all our technology, we haven't got a virtual stressor that as someone's walking up, they've got a small Bluetooth earphones on that are blaring out that crowd. There's a couple of screens in their peripheral view, which is going to simulate what's going on around them, so that it really does start to take away some of the attentional bits that are going on around that. And the physiology part to that is you could do a Wingate test in the final part, and which is going to recover. So your legs are feeling unusual, and then you walk down, and you've got that walk from the centre circle to the end is then not something you've practiced. And so you think, well, you can simulate that where you have one penalty, where actually one penalty takes 3 or 4 minutes of preparation to put the ball down to take, and every part of that is rehearsed.
Absolutely, and I think that's where all sports coaches and players need to have an understanding, or the scientist needs a little more respect, for want of a better word, because we're the people that can quantify all these things that are going on in the environment, in the periphery, all the requirements, and actually work out whether we can or can't replicate it. And I think you will find in most situations we can.
Yeah.
And I find this in golf, putting, which is the most important skill. That's what gets the ball in the hole, ultimately. And when you see golfers in general, even at the highest levels warming up, they will drop 3 or 4 balls, they'll hold the putter in their hand, they'll put them towards the hole, they'll go over and they'll pick them up. Now when they're in tournament, they will bend down, they will place the ball because they've cleaned it, they will then stand back up, they will then put, so there's different physiology going on here. Your heart rate must drop or increase as you drop down, you've got pressure on different muscles, you'll then put, you might have a little bit more blood in your head once you get back to it. It might be a 2.5 minute process instead of 4 balls being hit in a minute. And I found once I started to replicate that with golfers, more balls were going in. And they felt better in tournament conditions. Now, ironically, one of the early studies I did a lot of deliberate practice in golf. So if we are playing a course where the greens are big, you could be faced with a 100-foot putt. We'll put out to 100 feet. The next course you go to, the greens are short, it's in a hot country, they're quite sandy and dry, so it's not going to roll as well. We'll do that type of putting. We're going to another course where a lot of undulations and slopes. We'll start to put over that. And where it booked the literature that's already out there, people tend to write, if you repeat drills, ultimately over time you will improve. Out of a vast amount of data, there was no improvement in any of these drills, but I never let them repeat any. They're all going to a different course, different green, different conditions, etc. And the golfers said, I actually feel under pressure when I'm practicing and I'm working with you, which is the holy grail for me, because I'm thinking, right, okay, I've got tournament conditions here. And it's actually significant that the data showed no significance, because it wouldn't, and I didn't expect it to. But the feeling of the player when he was in tournament, in terms of hauling a pressure putt on the first hole from 14 feet, was not as daunting as it had been before the intervention.
Yeah, the training, in other words, was something to rely on.
I think they could rely on it. They could draw on the past. There was a psychological benefit in terms of reduction of anxiety, maybe increase in confidence. We didn't measure them physiologically, but I dare say I would hypothesise that there would be a difference.
The science will go along a lot further on the assessment as we can. We started. You've now data on heart rates of soccer players all alone. They'll play with a strap on. The chest, that'll soon disappear. I'm sure the method of assessing that might go slightly under the skin at some point. I've heard that at other conferences, and certainly in golf, potential for all sorts of physiological indicators, which would then provide the scientists with a massive data to actually go. Actually, let's start modelling what psychophysiological state is required to, or is consistent with your best performance, if that is identifiable.
I agree, and certainly the more of these markers or indicators that you draw from actual elite performances, the better training and practice design will be. And I think you've got, at this point in time, an advantage, and I think David Brailsford proved that with what he did with Sky. Everyone will catch up, and it gets harder. You're then looking for the next thing. But that's our job.
Yeah, what the cyclists have done very well is just taken to the margins of where people are dipping and just tried to make life a little bit easier. The structure of training to feel we're better in that position, we're better in that position, and the more sometimes you do that, you set out hundreds of opportunities to shave bits of better performance in there and everywhere, of which the way of working ultimately is multidisciplinary, isn't it?
Absolutely. And another recent case within a football club, Premier League club, low down the league, and you get data stats out from what you subscribe to, be it Opta, Prozone, etc. And there are league tables for distance covered, league tables for speed, league tables for headers won, and league tables for successful corners, etc. And you can go on. So maybe there's 20 odd parameters. And I was discussing with a manager of this particular team. Okay, the league table doesn't lie. We are where we are. Yeah. But if you look at all the other league tables, where are we? Strangely enough, we're quite low down.
Okay.
And you sort of say, right, if you put that onto your training ground, could they be faster? Well, yes. Right. Could we be more successful at corners through more practice? Yes. The crux of it being, well, we've got 20 league tables here. If we can push into the top 5 on the other 19, the important one, which is actually your league position in the Premier League, will surely be affected by affecting the other 19 variables.
Staying in the Premier League, if you are very good at set plays, you really can score goals off that, and you unpack how everyone else isn't very good at them. You get a weapon, don't you? The talk of the tennis players being able to hit pick the serve which the other person's not expecting.
You create a weapon. You create a fear. It might be the way someone delivers a free kick. I mean, not too long ago with Stoke City, it was a long throw from Rory Delap. And I think it's twofold. You've got an advantage, your players are more confident, and the opposition have fear, they have doubt. Because they will watch your set pieces, and I've seen a lot of this on training grounds. I went to one particular club, and they were showing the corners. It was actually Manchester City's corners, and saying this is how they take them. They're a danger in this way, and here are 8 goals they've scored.
Yeah.
So I said to the analyst, how many times have you actually taken that corner? You've shown 8 goals there. I don't know. Could you have a look for me? I looked into the data, I don't know what the number was, but for argument's sake, 70 odd. I said, right, so 62 times it's been defended successfully.
Yeah.
So we know what the corner is, and we can take the data where it's been successfully defended. So why don't we show that the players? So we're saying this is how the corner's going to be set up, this is the signal, this is the delivery, this is the movement, this is how you defend it. So they've then got a mental representation of successfully defending that corner. Whereas too many training grounds, they see the 8 goals, the minute the signal goes up, the brain thinks, ooh, City are dangerous here, they score from this. Simple psychology and using the statistics.
You've got a lot of modelling, haven't you? A lot of good models of defending.
Absolutely, so use those.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we talked of the Burnley-Liverpool game earlier, and they must have, I mean, the 80% possession, 40 odd, something a horrendous amount of shots. But they had to have players to block them, and clearly the Liverpool didn't have the corners were not weapons.
They weren't. I was actually on the game. Burnley defend the goal rather than defend against the team. If you look at where the players are positioned, you've quite often anything between 7, 9 up to 11 people inside the 2 white posts, so it's difficult to score. Liverpool, although I'm not sure on the number, but it could easily be 35, 40 shots. The majority were from distance. Majority did go over because the players, someone as skillful as Coutinho, yes, he can get it up over people and whip it down, but it's a difficult skill, and it didn't come off that day. And a lot were blocked. Burnley broke away twice, and it went in the net on both occasions. But again, you've got to be mindful. I saw a lot of things on Twitter, a lot of press things about science and stats, and say, it doesn't matter how much possession you've got, 19 possession will do, you'll win the game. My question is, over 38 games over 10 months, if you've got 19% possession, I'd be very surprised.
You've got to, well, I mean, your conversion rate of goal has got to be pretty good, hasn't it?
It was 100%. I think they had 2 shots and they both went in.
And you create massive pressure on yourself every time you get the ball to do something brilliantly with it, and that creates another set of problems. And it must be exhausting.
You couldn't.
I think I could play football at 90% of the opposition have the ball because I could just run about. but for most players, it doesn't work. It works in the opposite way.
Yeah, it would be very difficult for Burnley to pull that off on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Which is alluding to your other point, is that when Burnley won't come out to play like that every single time, and teams like Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea probably want to look at how the teams like Burnley set up against those big teams. In other words, that's their FA Cup final. I mean, Burnley went up last year, and that was the first big team to go there, and that was a packed ground. This was the homecoming game. This was in early in the season. In the same way Iceland had that one fabulous game against England, and everyone was up for it. And where people can really dig in a little bit, really dig in one game, whether they've got the resources to do that every single game. Roy Baumeister's self-control theory would say that if you keep serial attempts at self-control deplete.
Yeah.
And logically, we have to say, well, actually, if you have a brilliant game and knock out the seed, the next game is often a real tough one.
They're outliers, and I think they have to be treated with that respect. And I think this is where we can help as scientists and calm down expectation, maybe calm down celebration after the result, and identify the fact that, okay, we've won 2-0, but here are the process statistics. And if you put these process statistics into the other 37 games, the numbers are actually telling us that we're not going to be successful on a regular basis.
I worked with a soccer player who the team got very dominated, very keen by the stats, and he was a left winger, and his stats were shocking. Right? Not many touches, most of the touches wasted. He used to come off, good telling off. He goes, "Oh," I said, "Well, hold on, what?" I said, "What?" And so he worked out that the reason for the telling off was the stats. So I said, your solution is very easy. You drop down, you have a word with your left back, you get some soft passes in, and you now test the reaction of the person giving you feedback. Go and do that. So a few soft passes come back, and they go, "Good game this week." Of where the stats have then blinded the person, the culture, that this is the most important part. Well, actually, the bits he did the same of getting the balls and trying to make runs and losing it. Well, that's the nature of that position, not the stats. But you can, but in other words, where stats can be the governor,
they can be a problem, and this is where the relationship between scientist, psychologist, and coach has got to be professional. It needs groundwork. There are examples of players. They've completed 140 passes at a 98% completion rate, and the coach will say, "But he's not passed it forward once.
Yes.
He's not affected the football match." So then go back into the data collection instrument, and you might code a forward pass and give it a higher weighted percentage. And there are all sorts of things you can do, and sort of say, right, these are your stats in terms of successful forward passes, 0. So the coach has actually got evidence to sort of think, right, what he chooses to do, I'm either going to tell you off or I'm going to educate you to go forward in certain situations. These are the passes where you've gone sideways. Okay, you've kept possession, it's not been a problem because we haven't conceded any goals, but we've not won the game. And you've got to be smart with the statistics. You have to look at all the perspectives, the coach, the player, the scientist, and the person who is ultimately collecting the data.
Yeah, my example is one where done very crudely. The part I was alluding to, just the psychology works best in a multidisciplinary team, and that works best when the physiologist is thinking. The physiologist can be a brilliant psychologist. The physiologist that says, "You're really looking fit now," is delivered a massive confidence booster. The person, and it's where the psychologist can have really big effects by just looking at how some of the schedules of reinforcement, praise is given by nutritionists, by the coach,
Definitely.
by what they think, and almost not do that much with the team.
But social support is one of the key things that comes out in the first paper done at Manchester United. And Gary Neville, he openly says, at the end of the day, you're going out in front of 75,000 people there. If you're not nervous, you wouldn't be human. And I also remember him saying, the day that I get nervous going down that tunnel, that's probably going to be the end of my career, or the time that I'm getting close to packing in. And he said you would talk to Scholes, you would talk to Beckham, and they might say, "You've had a great week in training," or "You're looking good today," or whatever it may be. It could be his brother, it could be parents. But but quite often actually needed that reaffirmation to believe in his own abilities and his processes that he was going to deliver.
And your armchair public, don't get that, do they? I'm assuming that these people are they're not frail like everyone else. They not easily upset by an argument with their partner, and so on and so forth. But they are people.
Absolutely, they're human beings. They have wives, they have houses. The wives might have jobs. They've got parents. They've got children. They've got children who might be at school. Children who've changed school. Elderly parents who might be sick. They live the same life as us, and they're built of the same flesh and blood, and will have the same emotional functions. And I think we've got to be mindful not to portray them as invincible robots. Understand them as a human being and work from there in a football context.
So where's your research and stuff going then?
Good question. I think we've identified in one club what elite performance is. I mean, the multi-million-dollar question, if you was funded forever, what would you do? We'd perhaps look at Barcelona. We'll look at the German teams that have won World Cups until you get saturation point that, right, this really is what elite performance is. It's been tested with 4 people in golf. It's been tested ad hoc in a non-scientific way in terms of writing it up in football, and got success to date. Recommendations for governing bodies, educational institutions going forward. It was best practice transfer from one sport to another. Could that go into education? Could it go into business? I think it opens a whole myriad of hypotheses. At this point in time, I am working as a consultant in sport and getting results and enjoying that. Get great pleasure out of seeing other people succeed, maybe born out of my own failure as a young footballer. Because not only did I identify some of the reasons why I didn't fail, I identified some of the reasons why the other people succeeded. And to put that back in as a rigorous, scientifically tested educational medium does give me great pleasure, and I'd like to continue repeating that.
You set up models that allow assessment and prediction.
Prediction. In consultancy, several different sports, people will look at the papers or maybe an industry magazine that have done something in football or golf and say, right, you're the key to us winning. Can you come and can you make our team or this individual win? And what I'll say to them is, I know the processes of winning, but it's that athlete that will carry them out, not me. If they adhere to and stick to those processes over a period of time, you will by far increase your percentage likelihood of winning. And if you were to work across, we'll take a round number of 10 athletes, I'm quite confident I would predict that 6 or 7 of them would win.
Yeah, I say something, so I can make them better at understanding their anxiety, their inner thoughts, pulling out their self-confidence beliefs so that their confidence is more robust. They can come back from setbacks. They could do all of those things and still lose.
Yes.
Because the day. I mean, this is one of sometimes the discussion on performance is not necessarily a good thing. In that the measures that someone comes back to and says, well, what are the measures of anxiety going to show them that they're better? And we've got self-report measures that are so fragile, transparent, that make reliance on that really difficult. If there's any potential that that's linked to their selection, future funding, or that information is going to anywhere get leaked out to anything outside of you and that team, that an opponent knows that you get really nervous. You wouldn't ever say that. You might think that, and you'd regulate. Your part of your regulation of that would be to write down how nervous are you at 1.
Yeah.
Because part of my regulation is not going to tell myself, and by putting 4 down, I'm telling myself I'm 4. Sometimes when I've done work with people, that the sets of scores you've got early on are massively different to later on when the actual trust is developed, because they're more then going to actually, well, I used to do that, but now I realise that I'll use that range this way to know when I'm better within my own parameters on that scale. Maybe that's relating to the scale a bit more, but there's such a tricky thing. It's why sometimes the performance bit's a bit difficult from a psychologist going in, because someone outside goes, what are the numbers on that person to tell me he's now better mentally? And those numbers are really difficult to generate. Often I say, well, there aren't any numbers that we can give you, and that then that's why I'm not working as a consultant, because that's not a popular thing to say.
Well, it's a difficult thing when you're telling the truth, and one of the things that I've found in the elite environment is there is trust in experts, and if you are required by a player, that type of culture facilitates that, and they wouldn't actually ask for the data. There's trust that you're an expert. They had an example at United. They had a lady, and I think she was a professor from Manchester. I think her first name was Gail, but she was working on eye movement, that type of thing. 2 or 3 players were interested in this. They wanted to work on it. Ferguson said, fine. If that's what you want, that's what you can have. But no pressure on terms of, can you tell me that his eyes are better this week than they were last? And I think that is a general sort of humanistic looking after the well-being of your athletes.
No, it's when everything starts going wrong. It's when the person seems not winning, and the scrutiny around the resourcing of the various different consultants, and what does this person bring, and do we need to, and it can become a challenge.
It's a challenge, and it takes time as well. And sport, by nature, the media and everything that surrounds it, we are in a rush. And if we go back to the start, we opened up with 10,000 hours, and I did 10,000 hours, as I say, but I never played as a professional footballer. So there's a point where some of these 10,000 hours that are in these people aren't maybe deliberate, they aren't purposeful. So if you want to change that person where it's going wrong, it might be that there's 6,000 hours missing, theoretically, in the chunk. So it could take you 3 years.
It's probably misrepresented across several levels. In that one, the number of the exposure to the pressures at the top end is going to be difficult, because the physical abilities to cope with that are relatively difficult. Beyond and so the exposure someone has to those pressures is probably very few. That's why the Olympic finals, the World Cup finals, the big events are one-offs, and people look like they're in there as a one-off.
I mean, I think you can prepare for them, and there are certain barometers where if you meet and match those, you'll win, given the historical data that's out there. Someone else somewhere might well be training smarter than you, and there's nothing you can do about that. And I'll sort of say to people, if they stick to the processes that I put in place, I can't say it'll be a year, it could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, it could be 6 months in someone, but it's more, once they've adhered to all these processes and actually got consistent at beating these benchmarks, you can then say they're ready to win. You put them out there, someone in the USA, Australia or Ukraine's training better, there's nothing you can do about that. But I'd actually walk away with a good feeling about finishing second, because you've done everything that you possibly could. And hopefully they're young enough to revisit it and change the goalposts.
So, where could people get hold of you if they want to find out more?
I've 2 papers published in the International Journal of Sports Science and Coaching. I work
at open access as well, aren't they?
They're not at the moment.
No. You're on ResearchGate?
Yes, through UCLan.
Okay.
Obviously, at the University College of Football Business, that's where I work, and my contact details are on the papers, email address at UCLan, or through your good self. You're finishing your PhD soon, is it? 6 months.
So
yeah, we're hoping to be complete in 6 months.
Then there'll be a procession of people wishing to do a PhD with you.
Hopefully. I am 45.
That doesn't mean anything. 45 is but a slip of a lad in my mind.
But in any body of work, it's not sort of about, I've done this, I'm the expert, this is the end. This needs to be a field of work that is here long after I've finished practicing, long after I'm dead.
I mean, people will probably want to do PhDs with you, and you'd be in a supervisory role. Is that something that...
I'd love to be. Yeah, absolutely, because that's the only way that the field's going to grow.
Okay, so contact you at your university email. I'll put that on the bottom of the link.
Absolutely.
So, it's been a wrap.
Thank you very much.
It's been emotional. Thanks, very good. Thank you.